At 1347, under the gray sky of war-torn Zaporizhia, the landscape looked deceptively quiet. A single Russian ammunition train stretching over half a kilometer rumbled along the southern rail corridor, its steel cars heavy with explosives, rockets and shells. For weeks it had been the artery feeding 3 Russian mechanized divisions dug in for an upcoming offensive. Every T-90 tank, every 2 S-19 Musta howitzer, every fuel truck on the front relied on that line. And on that day, 12 Ukrainian drones, fast, small, and silent, were about to cut that artery open. This wasn't a random attack. It was a lesson in the future of war, where precision, innovation, and nerve outweighed armor and size. The Ukrainian planners knew their target intimately. The rail segment south of Tokmak was a weak link, a bottleneck with no cover, no alternate route, and perfect satellite visibility. The operation was designed around timing, striking at the moment the train would be fully exposed and least able to turn back. The mission demanded more than courage. It demanded a new kind of thinking. Each drone, no larger than a backpack, carried just enough explosive to ignite chaos if placed perfectly. Their goal was not to fight soldiers, but to destroy logistics, the invisible skeleton of modern armies. Inside 3 separate underground bunkers, spread across 10 kilometers, Ukrainian operators prepared their systems. They knew their launch would not go unnoticed. Russian electronic warfare sensors, tuned to detect electromagnetic anomalies, were constantly sweeping the air. When 12 engines roared to life simultaneously, the battlefield blinked. 48 brushless motors spinning in unison created an electromagnetic spike so sharp it lit up Russian monitors like a flare. In the dark rooms of Russian EW command posts, operators shouted coordinates and calculations. Unidentified signals grid north of Vasilivka. Within seconds, 152mm artillery began to fire. The first shell landed 800 meters from one of the Ukrainian bunkers. The second came closer. The ground shook. Dust rained from the bunker ceiling. Yet the drone swarm was already airborne. The Ukrainians had anticipated this. Their formation split instantly. 3 drones climbed high, acting as decoys. The rest skimmed the terrain at 97 km/h, just above treetop level. The real trick wasn't in flight, it was in communication. While the Russians flooded the skies with jamming signals, the drones continued to move flawlessly. The secret was fiber optics. Each of the 12 drones was linked to its operator through an ultra-thin 8mm wide fiber optic cable, a line of light transmitting data at the speed of photons immune to radio interference. No matter how many Zettel R-300 Kuzich jammers screamed into the air, the Ukrainian drones flew in silence untouched. It was warfare stripped to its purest form, invisible, mathematical, surgical. Inside the Russian command net, confusion grew. Their sensors registered chaos, a wall of static where drones should have vanished. The jamming had blinded their own defenses. Their BTR-82A and Pantsir S-1 crews could no longer coordinate or share targeting data. The radio waves that should have guided defense instead collapsed into white noise. Meanwhile, in the Ukrainian bunkers, operators worked with the calm of surgeons. They knew each cable was fragile. If shrapnel cut it, control would switch to radio, and the drone would be vulnerable. To survive the storm, they had built redundancy, 3 control bunkers, each 500 meters apart, linked through underground tunnels. When one bunker took a direct hit and lost 3 drones, the others continued seamlessly. 9 drones remained. 9 blades of precision still on course. And above the screaming artillery, one thought pulsed through every operator's headset: don't stop the swarm. At 1348, the sky above Zaporizhia turned into a calculus of survival. The Ukrainian swarm split like a surgeon's incision, 3 drones climbing to bait sensors, 9 diving low to become blades. The train, a black iron artery stretching nearly half a kilometer, steamed toward a curve where rail embankments gave no cover and no chance for evasive maneuvers. Every wheel turn pulled more weight toward the front line's ammunition fuel, and the kind of ordnance that turns plans into assaults. The Russians reacted instantly. Their EW nodes screamed into life, Zettel R-330 and other jammers pumping kilowatts of noise into the air. Artillery crews fed coordinates from signal analysts, walked in 152mm rounds to suspected control sites. A shell slammed 800 meters from one bunker. Another came closer. The Earth itself seemed to argue with the drone motors. But this fight had been designed as much around physiology as technology. The Ukrainian operators had rehearsed under simulated barrage, and the control architecture was deliberately redundant. Control came not from a single throne, but from 3 separate underground bunkers spaced 500 meters apart and linked by tunnels. If one node died, the others would keep the brain alive. When shrapnel severed the fiber to one bunker and 3 drones fell silent, the swarm did not stutter. 9 drones found the corridor and continued. The fiber optic tether was the operation's secret lifeline. Each drone rode an 8mm cable, ultra-thin, almost invisible, carrying video and control as pulses of light. This wasn't radio, it was a private physical data highway. Against the broad-spectrum howl of Zadel jammers, the light inside the glass did not care. Operators watched high-definition feeds while Russian screens filled with static. Of course, fiber brings vulnerability, stray shrapnel, and snapped cables. The Ukrainians planned for that. When a link broke, the drone did not die mid-air. It instant glided. At 97 km/h, aerodynamic momentum became Allied drones with exhausted batteries or severed tethers could coast for up to 100 meters, their mass carrying them into the final approach. Pilots timed that glide to the train's flank, a dead reckoning ballet in 3 dimensions. Approach geometry mattered. The swarm used the train as a moving shield, hugging the car's long silhouette, so ground small arms and vehicle crews risked firing through their own materiel. In sectors where BTR-82A crews opened up bullets, sang past drone frames like hail. Those gunners fired bravely 800 rounds per minute, but statistics favored the swarm. The aircraft-sized reflexes of a human-guided drone at close range are a nightmare for a stabilized gun designed to engage predictable, heavier targets. Then came the thermite strikes. 4 drones detached from the primary attack and dove low to the rails behind the train. Thermite charges, compact and brutal, burned through steel like a hot knife through wax. Where they struck, rails softened and pooled. Molten iron stitched the bed, creating instant traps. The train could not reverse. Its escape lane had dissolved into molten metal and black smoke. The thermite smoke did another job. It blanketed infrared sensors and masked thermal signatures, buying seconds for the final run. Command and control in the Russian sector frayed. Their own jamming had become a boomerang. The broad-spectrum interference severed unit-to-unit comms. Panzer S-1 and short-range systems found themselves blind to each other's warnings. In the confusion, targeting data failed to cohere into coordinated defensive fire. The BTR that spotted the swarm could not reliably call the nearby Panzer to engage. Electronic shields meant to protect turned into a fractured network, each cell shouting in white noise, while the swarm moved like a surgeon between ribs. As the swarm closed, contact weapons switched modes. 7 drones struck the engine, and forward cars precision hits designed to breach tankers and ammunition wagons. Smaller shaped charges and contact explosives ignited munitions. The first detonations were surgical and then immediate and terrible. One car carrying TOS-1A thermobaric rockets burst the resulting fireball, climbing 400 meters into the sky. Pressure waves rolled outward, ripping canopies and hurling debris. The blast sequence became self-feeding. Secondary detonations lit neighboring wagons. Fuel tanks ruptured, turning rails into rivers of flame. 24 cars at the train's front were destroyed in seconds. The corridor that had fed 3 mechanized divisions was now an inferno and a cratered railbed. Recovery would take not hours, it would take days or weeks under fire. Casualty calculus shifted from people to logistics. The loss was operationally enormous, an estimated $127 million in material erased for a cost to Ukraine measured in thousands commercial drone components, thermite charges, batteries totaling roughly $4,800 by the operations accounting. The economists and planners on both sides would not only tally dollars, they would tally tempo. Supply timetables collapsed. Artillery regiments at the front reported rounds and fuel shortages within 48 hours. Offensive timetables slipped. Windows of planned maneuver closed. When the flames finally guttered, the silent rails testified to a new reality. A small, inexpensive swarm had rewritten a campaign's logistics. Not by frontal force, but by attack on function on the arteries that make force possible. And across command nets from Zaporizhia to Moscow, the same question pulsed. If a handful of drones can unmake a convoy in minutes, how many other nodes are vulnerable? How do you defend a supply line against a weapon that costs less to build than a single shell it destroys? Above the smoke, the Ukrainian controllers exhaled. They had executed timing, redundancy, and physics in concert. The train that had been the spine of a planned offensive lay finished twisted metal molten rails in a cratered earth where logistics once flowed. The battlefield had been scored not by tonnage, but by ideas, and on that afternoon, ideas had bled steel. At 13:50, less than 3 minutes after the first motors whined to life, the front of the Russian ammunition train became a pyrotechnic instrument. 7 drones, guided, timed, and aimed to millimeter precision, found their marks: the locomotive, the forward fuel tank, and the first rows of munitions wagons. The first contact was almost surgical, a shaped charge impact on a tanker car. A thin flash and instant flame. Then the sound of metal screaming as vaporized fuel ignited. What followed was not a single explosion, but a cascading architecture of blasts. One car's detonation blew shrapnel into its neighbor. That neighbor's ammunition cooking off sent fragments into a third. Primer charges and detonators reacted. Fuel lines ruptured and sprayed burning liquid across wheels and sleepers. The TOS-1A laden wagon that one drone punched open produced a result no planner wanted to see. When a thermobaric rocket container detonates amid fuel and propellant, the fireball is absolute. A column of white-hot flame and black smoke rose 400 meters into the sky, visible for miles and photographed by satellites within an hour. Secondary detonations became the enemy of rescue. The blast waves stripped paint off nearby trees and hurled rail ties like toys. 24 cars at the train's front were gutted in less than 60 seconds. Where once iron rails linked rear depots to forward gun lines, molten steel now pooled and buckled into warped ribbons. Where crews might have once uncoupled and run the rest of the convoy back to safety, the thermite strikes that had burned through the rails left no retreat. The track behind the wreckage was a black river of molten metal and slag. The train, for all practical purposes, was trapped and then destroyed. On the ground, Russian reaction moved through predictable stages: alarm-targeted artillery, attempted suppression, and then frantic salvage planning. 152 mm batteries began to rain rounds into the surrounding fields, trying to knock out suspected drone control nodes. One hail of shells struck within 800 meters of an operator bunker, collapsing earthen revetments and sending dust into the command tent. Russian BTR-82A crews fanned out, trying to sweep areas for hidden teams, while nearby Panzer S-1 and short-range systems rotated sensors and tried to regain a coherent air picture. But with the rails melted and the wreckage burning, the priority shifted quickly from engagement to containment and protection of remaining stockpiles. The physical damage was staggering and quantifiable. 24 cars destroyed a cratered and welded-over rail bed, and a pile of scorched, twisted armor-piercing rounds and rocket motors that could not be salvaged without specialized handling and days of cooling. Military engineers later estimated the immediate material loss at approximately $127 million. Against that, the Ukrainian outlay craft parts, thermite charges, batteries, and support was calculated at roughly $4,800. The math was brutal and undeniable, an outsized strategic effect produced by a shoestring budget. Tactically, the strike produced instant paralysis. Units that had expected fresh deliveries of 122 mm shells, tank propellant, and spare parts found themselves waiting in place. Artillery regiments reported a steep decline in rounds fired within 48 hours. Commanders on the road to a planned offensive watched windows close as logistics officers scrambled to reroute supplies through longer, more dangerous corridors. Convoy timetables doubled or tripled. The tempo of offensive operations, a fragile cadence dependent on reliable deliveries, stuttered, and then, for some brigades, stopped. Salvage and clearance became a risky, time-consuming chore. Explosive ordnance teams and rail repair units had to wait for cooling for controlled detonations, and for minesweepers too. By late afternoon, the smoke from the Zaporizhia strike had drifted into satellite swaths and news feeds. What started as a tactical ambush at 1347 became a strategic lesson visible from command centers in Kiev, Brussels, and Washington, D.C. The destruction of a single ammunition train of $127 million of material reduced to slag did more than blow open a rail corridor. It reoriented thinking about how wars are supplied, sustained, and ultimately won. For the Russian theater commanders, the calculus hardened immediately. The rail segment south of Tokmak, once a reliable artery, had become an exposed liability. Convoys were rerouted onto longer, softer routes. Tonnage per move was cut, and commanders ordered stockpiles to be dispersed into smaller, harder-to-target caches. What had been an operational rhythm scheduled deliveries, predictable timetables, and concentrated stocks was forced into a nerve-wracking improvisation. Tempo, the invisible metric of offensive power, slowed. Plans for near-term offensives were delayed as logistics staffs recalculated risk and available ammunition. Across the Atlantic, military planners watched closely. In Pentagon briefings and EUCOM war rooms, analysts labeled the Zaporizhzhia operation a textbook study in asymmetric interdiction. Low cost means producing high strategic effect. The Americans and NATO allies read three key messages. First, small, dispersed and networked systems can cripple high-value logistics nodes. Second, electronic warfare and jamming, if poorly coordinated, can degrade one's own situational awareness as much as the enemy's. Third, redundancy and dispersion in logistics are now as vital as tanks and armor. Defense thinkers in London, Berlin, and Paris echoed the same sobering refrain. Naval and ground logistics planners began reassessing choke points across theater lines, rail bridges, marshalling yards, fuel depots, and push for investments in camouflage, underground storage decoys, and rapid rail repair capabilities. Militaries that long prized concentration for efficiency now faced a trade-off: speed versus survivability. Disperse too much and operational reach shrinks. Concentrate and a single swarm can bleed you dry. Politically, the strike rippled outward as well. Allied capitals used the footage: molten rails, towering fireballs, fused track to argue for continued and targeted aid sensors, counter-drone systems, rail repair materiel, and the tactical training that allowed a small Ukrainian team to synchronize in an era where code can outthink armor. When 12 drones erased a train, they didn't just cripple a supply line, they dismantled a century of assumptions. This was not a battle for ground. It was a battle for the future. If you believe understanding these moments matters, like, share, and subscribe. Because the next war won't be fought by who has the most metal, but by who learns the fastest.